Roles of the President, Chief Executive, Part 1 reading. The nation's CEO. How does the President serve as Chief Executive? The Chief Executive role is similar to the role of a Chief Executive Officer or CEO of a company. Like a CEO, the President has a vision of where he or she wants the nation to go. The President can call on the Cabinet to give advice, carry out requests, and work with Congress to get legislation passed that will bring that vision to life. The responsibility of the Chief Executive is to execute or carry out the laws. Executive orders. The President's job is to enforce the laws, not make them. However, the Constitution gives the President the power to issue executive orders. An executive order is an extension of a law passed by Congress that lets the President take action and carry out the law more effectively. Executive orders are considered as official as laws. They can also be declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Why does the President have this power? In times of crisis, divisive action is often needed. The President can quickly act without having to ask anyone for approval. This means the government can act immediately and bypass the legislative process. For example, the President may issue an executive order to mobilize the federal government's response to a natural disaster. In 2005, President George W. Bush issued Executive Order 13390. This order offered federal support to residents who were recovering from the devastating effects of Hurricane Katrina and Rita. Executive orders can help the President carry out the roles of running the federal government and serving as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. In 1948, President Harry Truman issued Executive Order 9981, which guaranteed equality of treatment and opportunity for members of the armed services. This historic order was intended to end racial discrimination in the U.S. military. At times, presidents have used executive orders to carry out policies that Congress was unwilling to support and that can affect the workforce outside the executive branch. In his 2014 State of the Union address, President Obama expressed his frustration with Congress's lack of willingness to increase the minimum wage. America does not stand still, and neither will I. So wherever and whenever I could take steps without legislation to expand opportunity for more American families, that's what I'm going to do. In February 2014, the President issued Executive Order 13658, which raised the minimum wage for all workers on federal construction and service contracts. Executive orders are controversial. In 1942, after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. This order authorized the government to move more than 100,000 Japanese Americans into internment camps. Roosevelt issued the order because he believed Japanese Americans posed an immediate threat to national security. In 1988, President Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act. This law compensated American families who had been detained at the camps and formally apologized for Japanese internment. Presidential pardons. In what circumstances can the President give a pardon? The Constitution also gives the President the power to grant pardons, except in the case of impeachment. A pardon legally clears someone charged or convicted of a crime and prevents that person from receiving any punishments. The power applies to both military and civilian pardons. After the end of the Civil War, President Andrew Johnson pardoned all former Confederate soldiers who were willing to take an oath of allegiance to the United States. Although this was a major step in bringing the southern states back to the Union, many Americans felt that Johnson's approach to individuals who had taken up arms against the United States was too lenient. Perhaps the most famous presidential pardon was granted by Gerald Ford. Ford was vice president under Richard Nixon. He became president in 1974 when Nixon resigned to avoid being removed by impeachment. Ford granted Nixon a full pardon for any crimes he may have committed in the Watergate scandal, hoping this would help the nation get past the crisis. It is believed that a trial of Richard Nixon, if it became necessary, could not fairly begin until a year or more has elapsed. In the meantime, the tranquility to which this nation has been restored by the efforts of recent weeks could be irreparably lost by the prospects of bringing to trial a former president of the United States. The prospects of such a trial will cause prolonged and divisive debate over the propriety of exposing to further punishment and degradation. A man has already paid the unprecedented penalty of relinquishing the highest elective office of the United States. Many Americans did not agree that Nixon should have been pardoned. These citizens were angry that Nixon would not go to trial and held accountable for the crimes of which he was accused. To this day, there is controversy about whether Ford's pardon of Nixon was justified.